I never thought that mowing a lawn was considered a crime, let alone worthy of a 911 call. But I underestimated the ability of some people to turn anything into a scandal, especially her. The woman with the blazer in the middle of summer, the pristine white sandal that never touched clay, and the disapproving look of someone who judges even the tilt of the street lamp. It was Sunday, the day when most people rest, clean the house, have a barbecue, or simply watch TV. I, as a good stubborn person with a free schedule, decided it was the ideal time to put the land in order. I grabbed my brush cutter, straw hat, and earplugs, and set off to cut down the undergrowth. Nothing extraordinary, nothing illegal, just grass. Overgrown, disheveled, almost begging for help. The farm is in a kind of hybrid area, half rural, half stuck in a condominium with a white picket fence, rules for everything and signs warning that smiling is compulsory, but only if you do it the right way. The entrance to my property borders the southern boundary of the condominium, and that's where the clowning started. I mowed half the land in peace, sun, sweat, and the comforting sound of a machine doing its job. But when I approached the side of the fence that separates my land from her house, everything changed. She appeared like an indignant figure. First, she just looked. Then it came walking towards the edge of her lawn, with its arms crossed, and a look that mixes disgust with arrogance. I pretended not to see. I carried on with the job, but she wasn't satisfied with being a spectator. She shouted something, but the noise of the brush cutter drowned it out. I took off my protector, looked at her, and listened. "You can't cut like that. It's too aggressive. You'll stir up dust. You'll get into my house." I stopped. I looked around. Dust? At most, the smell of freshly cut grass. Nothing to justify such an outburst. "Ma'am, I'm mowing my lawn, on my land, with regulated equipment, in broad daylight, within the permitted hours. Everything is fine here." She stomped her foot, literally. "This is a visual attack. You're sabotaging the community atmosphere. The noise is oppressive." I took a deep breath. I put the protector back on and went back to work. 5 minutes later, she was gone. I thought, she's given up. Illusion. Half an hour later, I see lights, sirens, a police car. It parks exactly at the side entrance to my farm. A young policeman gets out, looking like a recent graduate. Before I can say anything, I hear a familiar voice. That's him. He's cutting grass as if he's going to destroy the land. A clearly hostile attitude. She was standing next to the car, excited like someone expecting a medal for civic duty. She gesticulated like a stage actress, pointing at me as if I were a criminal on the run. The policeman looked at me, looked at her, and seemed confused. Before he could say anything, another car arrived. This time, someone I knew very well got out. My uncle, the sheriff. His expression when he saw who had filed the complaint was one of pure, contained pleasure. He walked slowly, like someone who understood everything before he arrived. He looked at me, then at her, and asked with the calm of someone who savors every second, "Good afternoon. What's the problem here?" She started spewing out words. "He's using an absurd machine. The sound is too loud. It's affecting my space. The grass is being cut unevenly, creating visual instability." Visual instability. That's a new one. My uncle heard everything, without interrupting. When she'd finished, he turned to me. "Is the tractor calibrated?" I nodded. He smiled. "So, ma'am, unfortunately, cutting grass on your own farm is not a crime. But making a false report can get you into trouble. Do you want to continue with this as an occurrence?" She stammered. "I didn't expect that. I didn't expect the policeman she called to be part of my family. What's more, I didn't expect someone not to validate her delirium." My uncle was direct. "Do you want to file an official complaint against illegal activity on private land with authorized equipment?" She hesitated. Her arrogance faded in the warm afternoon air. She nodded negatively and stepped back, literally. The first policeman apologized, recorded that there was no violation of public order, and recommended that she avoid calling 911 without cause. The sheriff, before getting into his car, let loose, "If you want, I can lend you my mower. It even draws on the lawn." She stood still, dry, mouth half closed. The noise of the brush cutter once again sounded like the soundtrack of justice. But that was only the beginning, because she didn't accept the humiliation quietly. And what came next was a spectacle in itself. After the police visit, she disappeared for a while. A temporary disappearance, of course, the strategic kind. She disappeared from the groups, didn't show up for her daily walks in a blazer and designer sneakers, and the balcony of her house, always adorned with pots in symmetrical sequence, was empty, as if even the plants were ashamed. But all it took was for the heat of shame to cool down a little for her to start acting up again. Only this time, behind the scenes. Her profile on the HOA group was back up, but without her name. She now went by the code name Visual Community Committee. Ridiculous. She started posting anonymous suggestions about sound harmony in condominium rural transition zones and silent green area maintenance protocols. A neighbor commented, "That bill is more disguised than a children's theater wig." The most hilarious thing is that she tried to turn grass cutting into a philosophical debate. She created a dossier, yes, a whole PDF, with suggestions for acceptable levels of sound vibration and aesthetic rhythms of lateral pruning. The file was 14 pages long, 14, with color graphics, photos of European lawns, and a passage that said, "The grass speaks, and those who cut it must know how to listen to it." All this because of a Sunday and a brush cutter. Rumors also began to circulate that I was doing construction work without a permit, that the noise was louder than allowed, that the farm animals were suffering from the noise, that there was visual and vibrational intimidation between neighboring borders. The woman was creating a new vocabulary just to justify her own shame. Of course, she didn't sign anything. She just released the rumors in half words, said, "I heard," and used less informed neighbors as human gossip mails. Some fell for it, others just watched, waiting for the next outbreak. But things escalated when she tried to get the town hall involved. Yes, she sent a letter with a formal complaint about interference by rural activity in the condominium environment. The paper was signed with a false name, but anyone who looked closely could see the signature was all crooked and done in a hurry. That's when my uncle got involved again. He'd received a copy of the letter because, as sheriff of the region, he follows up on all notifications involving mixed properties. He read the document, laughed so hard he almost fell off his chair. Then he called me. "Is the woman trying to regulate brush cutters now? The next step is to demand that the oxen wear headphones?" He decided to act, but in a way that was even more embarrassing for her. He requested a meeting with the HOA official, open, with a registered agenda. The subject: legal limits on residents' actions on neighboring private properties. The call dropped like a bombshell on the group. On the night of the meeting, the community room was full. Even people who never show up decided to see the show. She arrived late, of course, wearing sunglasses even though it was night, carrying a briefcase as if she were presenting a defense in an international court. But her expression was no longer the same. There was fear mixed with mended arrogance. My uncle opened the meeting with a calm, almost didactic tone. "Good evening. We're here to clarify that there is no crime in cutting grass on your own land. No state, municipal, or cosmic law prohibits the use of a brush cutter in rural areas during the day. Any attempt to turn this into a complaint will be considered an abuse of the emergency system. And, as has already happened, it will be documented and responded to." She tried to interrupt. She made that classic gesture of raising her hand while mumbling something like, "But there is a sensitive issue." He cut her off, dryly. Aesthetic sensitivity is not a legal justification for interfering with private property. This is an attempt at control with no legal backing, and if it continues, it could be classified as persecution. Silence. Absolute silence. The meeting ended with the majority of residents voting in favor of a new guideline. Any complaint involving another resident should have at least evidence of real damage and an independent witness. The rule was unanimously dubbed the lawn noise clause. The next day, the gardener next door showed up with a brush cutter, just like mine. He turned it on at 8 in the morning, with force. For 2 hours, the sound invaded the street like an anthem of freedom. Nobody complained, not even her. She just closed the windows and disappeared. Later, I found a flyer on the farm gate, a printed sheet in clumsy handwriting, written in the first person saying, "I would like to remind everyone that unauthorized noise creates discomfort and environmental instability. Nature asks for silence." Unsigned, of course, but everyone knew. The problem? She didn't realize that the more she spoke, the more people heard something else, the sound of their own fall. And the noise that would follow would be much louder than a brush cutter. Her forced silence didn't last as long as everyone would have liked. It only took 2 weeks before she decided to try and turn things around. But in the wrong way, of course. The kind of mistake that only someone with overdosed self-esteem and an undernourished sense of reality would make. It started with a rumor. She was talking to a lawyer, not a real one of those who still prints cards in the Comic Sans font and advertises in the local newspaper as a specialist in community rights, town planning, and residential welfare. The kind of professional who accepts payment by check and lunchbox. Soon after, it came to my attention that she had filed a formal complaint against me, claiming that the sound of my brush cutter had caused her an episode of acute emotional dysregulation with symptoms of visual anxiety and chronic auditory stress. The document used terms like sensory pollution and rural vibrational attack. There was an attachment with photos of my mowed land and even a screenshot from my Instagram where I appeared smiling next to the brush cutter. The woman tried to turn a grass cut into a public health case. The case was filed in the regional court with a request for symbolic compensation of $1,000, an amount that, according to her lawyer, represented the psychological cost of living next to a noisy neighbor who ignores the signs of nature. The forum took the case seriously for 30 seconds. It read the title of the complaint and decided that it needed to call the town sheriff to testify, since he had been present on the day of the incident. And that's when the joke turned into a tragedy. My uncle received the summons with restrained laughter. He knew he'd have to testify, but he also knew it would be the death knell for that woman's already dying reputation. On the appointed date, he showed up in uniform and entered the courtroom with the calmness of someone invited to a picnic. In front of the judge, she presented her thesis. She spoke in a shaky but rehearsed voice. She told of the sound oppression, the tractor cutting through my peace, and the aggressive vibration that would have made her dog tremble for hours. The judge listened without saying anything. He just took notes. Then it was my uncle's turn. He came in, sat down with his back straight, and answered all the questions in short, direct sentences. When the judge asked if there had been any inappropriate behavior on my part, he answered with a single sentence. He cut grass on a Sunday morning, on his own land, with legal equipment, within the permitted hours. The room fell silent. Her lawyer tried to counter, asking about the psychological impact such an attitude could have on a sensitive neighbor. And my uncle replied, "If mowing the lawn causes trauma, I don't think the problem is the sound. It's who listens to it." The judge didn't laugh, but his eyes sparkled with desire. That sentence closed the case. The case was dismissed the same afternoon, with a formal recommendation that future complaints be based on real laws, not environmental poetry. But the embarrassment wasn't confined to the courthouse. The minutes of the hearing fell into the hands of a local columnist, a semi-retired journalist who loved to write sarcastic chronicles about the city. He wrote an entire column about the case with the headline, "The Grass That Was Cut More Than It Should Have Been." He described the woman as the defender of plant peace and said that the city was now experiencing the collective trauma of listening to lawnmowers afraid of being denounced for landscape terrorism. The text went viral. Even without naming names, everyone knew. The neighborhood laughed. Even the city council shared the story as part of a campaign against false reports. She, of course, disappeared again. But this time, the disappearance tasted like irreversible defeat. The house was closed for days. The curtains, which were always open, became closed. The garden, once a model of aesthetic symmetry, was now neglected, with weeds growing between the stones and dried leaves taking over the sidewalk. The few friends she still had avoided commenting, but one of them let it slip. She's saying that she's been silenced, that the city isn't ready for a woman with a modern sensibility. The HOA didn't have to oust her from any position. She stepped down herself. She said she needed time to reflect on the coexistence of noise and community. She never showed up at a meeting again. And her last contribution was a printed letter placed on the wall of the association's headquarters saying, "Not every sound needs to be heard. Some cut through more than the bush." Yes, she tried to come out on top, but those who saw everything knew. The brush cutter had done the right job. It cut grass, yes, but it had also cut a mask that had been hanging for some time, and her shame hadn't hit bottom yet, because what came next was an official message. It wasn't a video or a leaked audio, it was a piece of paper, a simple communiqué, printed in black and white, with a City Hall logo and protocol language. But it carried a weight that not even a car siren could make sound any louder. The message came straight from the municipality's legal department, sent to the HOA's headquarters, and distributed to residents by official mail. The kind that the letter carrier delivers with an acknowledgement of receipt and the look of someone who knows there's a bomb inside the envelope. Subject: clarification on unfounded complaints related to agricultural activity and rural maintenance in areas bordering the urban perimeter. In practice, what it said was that the town hall had received a series of complaints in recent months involving noise pollution from lawnmowers, tractors, and the like. That these complaints had been analyzed, and none of them had any legal basis. And that, furthermore, one of these complaints involved an attempt by one resident to sue another, using arguments that the forum itself considered to have no legal basis, logic, or reasonableness. The best part? The note went on to say, "The City Council reinforces that the use of agricultural or domestic machinery to maintain private areas, including grass cutting, pruning, mowing, and the like, is a legal activity and protected by the right to property. No urban norm overrides regular rural use, nor will attempts to turn legal practices into neighborhood disturbances for subjective or aesthetic reasons be tolerated." Yes, the entire municipality now had an official opinion on the story. And of course, the message was for her. There was no name on the note, but it was as if it were in bold. "Message for the woman in the beige blazer and the selective hearing crises." The news spread like wildfire through dry grass. WhatsApp groups exploded. The columnist's article, which had already gone viral, was updated with the subtitle, "City Hall releases note and confirms grass can be cut in peace." And the city didn't forgive. Someone printed the note in an enlarged format, framed it, and put it on the wall of the local bakery. Another resident made stickers with the phrase, "Legal activity protected. You can mow." A street artist discreetly graffitied on the square's abandoned wall, "The grass speaks, but common sense screams." Even the neighborhood's senior citizens walking club, the same group she tried to lead in the past, showed up in full uniform one morning, wearing green t-shirts that read, "Mowers are not a crime. Boring person, yes." Her response? None. For the first time, absolute silence. Her house spent weeks with a locked gate, garbage cans collected by a service provider, and no lights on after 6 p.m. The plants on the balcony began to dry out. The grass in the garden grew without pruning. Neighbors started crossing the street just so they wouldn't hear any more theories about lateral visual stress. It was in this climate that a new sign appeared at the entrance to the condominium. "Unit available. Direct sale with owner." Her house was for sale. Discreetly, without a traditional sign. Just a plastic sheet attached to the glass of the side window. Contact via email. No number. No guided tour. It was almost a distress call disguised as an advertisement. And of course, the advertised price was above market. Perhaps out of ego, perhaps to keep the curious away. But the realtors knew it was only a matter of time. The whole city knew who lived there, and no one wanted to inherit the shadow of that embarrassment. Meanwhile, life went on in the neighborhood. The HOA started recording all meetings in digital minutes. They created an internal code of conduct against abusive complaints. And the rule became clear. Complaints need proof, grounds, and real impact. Hunches, chirping, and personal drama were banned from the microphone. On the farm, the weeds have been pruned again, with gusto. The brush cutter has been turned up to the max, with a new, quieter motor, but still powerful enough to leave any pasture clean. And now, without any Karen planted on the other side of the fence to create a noise crisis. One Saturday, while I was finishing clearing the land, my uncle drove by. He stopped, got out with a bag, and said, "I brought you a present." Inside the bag was a T-shirt, white, black lettering. It read, "Official Conflict Zone Grinder." He laughed and added, "If she comes back, let her know. But leave the brush cutter running." The woman was never seen again. They say she's moved to another town. Others think she's living with her sister in another state. Her profile has disappeared from social networks. The vibrational community she tried to create became an inside joke at HOA lunches. And to this day, when someone complains about something silly, someone says, "Careful. That smells like a noise complaint." At the end of the day, the lesson was simple. Mowing can make noise, but not as much as the fall of a mask that was sustained by screaming. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.